Hi there. Okay, I'm going to try to remember all of the 5 brands that have recently rebranded or had a brand refresh to talk through in this video. Usually there's that sort of back to school feel around September, October, and I understand it's quite an energetic time to change something about your business and to take action, which is great. Unfortunately, I was under the weather for the whole time with the lurgy that many people have now, so I'm belatedly getting around to recording my overview or comment on those rebrands for you guys. So there have been, as I said, 5 quite high profile rebrands. In that I am calling Waitrose and John Lewis separate brands, but you could call those one. But it's fairly publicised what's happened with both of them. They have decided to put more prominence on the fact that they are a partnership organisation where all the customers and all the staff can become partners, especially the staff that work there, which is quite a disruptive and generous and different retail business model, which is fantastic. So I think to begin with, I'd say it's really great that they are making more of a thing about that in their branding, in the same way as the Co-op tried to do that last year by returning to their 1960s logo. On the whole, I don't think John Lewis and Waitrose have been much more successful in maintaining that reputation of a partnership and as good employers than the Co-op has, so I can see why they maybe needed it more. And I don't have a problem with including the and partners in copy and on the website. I'm a little underwhelmed, basically, by the way that they've visually done it in both of their brands recently, and I'll tell you why. Generally, I think that it has, ironically, done the opposite and made them seem slightly more official. Some people have commented that they sound, Waitrose and Partners now sounds like a law firm rather than a supermarket or a grocery store. And the fact that they actually made both of their logos for John Lewis and Waitrose all in uppercase now, and they have possibly changed their font as well, I'm not entirely sure, but in any case they've gone for an uppercase and it loses that roundness and the approachable feel and warmth of the letters that they previously had in their logo. I think actually makes it come across a little colder and less inviting to customers. So visually that isn't something I think they've achieved that well. I think in terms of Waitrose's rebrand, so I've got my computer here, I can show you some images, but they've opted for a very similar olive green, but it's slightly less zesty and limey, which for me makes it look perhaps a little more old-fashioned. It doesn't seem quite as accessible, which is a shame because I think that even though Waitrose is a premium groceries brand, they have made quite a concerted effort recently to make it seem like an affordable premium option or a sort of weekday luxury rather than high-end and snobby. They have at the moment though, however, changed on their website. They now have their by royal appointment crests very visible with the new uppercase logo.
So as I was saying, on the new Waitrose site, everything's in uppercase. It's still a fairly modern and friendly typeface, and I like that it's quite widely spaced and quite airy. Visually, I wouldn't have a problem with it if it were any brand that wasn't Waitrose, really. I mean, it's lovely, and I'm glad they held on to the olive green, but essentially it feels like a lot of new brands and a lot of other brands out there as a logo type on its own with just the typography. And then, yeah, they've got their by royal appointment crests, which is fantastic for them. But I think the whole aim of this was to sort of break down the sense of hierarchy, and I'm not entirely sure that's been achieved. And over on their other brand mark here with the graduated stripes, I don't dislike that. I can see that still gives the, it maintains the brand green. It gives a sense of a premium grocery brand. But for me, it feels a little bit dated, and I'll come around to why I feel that in a second, and obviously it's subjective, but With John Lewis, I feel it even more. Obviously, monochrome is pretty classic, but for me, I feel really sad that John Lewis have gone for something like this, where it's pretty generic, if I'm honest. It doesn't give me the sense of their brand, the trust, that reliability and reassurance that John Lewis has built up, and also just visual design aspect, that the sizing they have of it on their website. Obviously the website's responsive, but the sizing they currently have is pretty terrible. The partners is illegible unless you have 20/20 eyesight or pretty good prescription glasses. So I feel that they've really let on their website design, they're letting their brands take a backseat behind their homewares, the TV in this instance. But the main reason for me, I don't know if anybody else feels this, and it is personal, but I feel that these stripes that both Waitrose and John Lewis have now, with the sort of graduating length of them, obviously this one could be seen as like a barcode, but for me they really feel like they remind me of trends of the noughties. So, for example, if I was going to be generous, obviously Paul Smith has owned this and this is his, so that makes complete sense. But this is something that was devised for Paul Smith, more than probably 2 decades ago. And for me, it gives me a bit of a wallpaper feel, bit of a sort of late 90s, early noughties attempt at modern interiors. And for me, that misses the mark somewhat recently.
So next up is Uber. They were founded in 2009, and when we first saw them and used their service, you may remember they had a pretty clearly identifiable font. It was the word Uber in quite a squared off font, and their brand mark and the app icon was the U with the squared off base. And I think that was pretty successful for them. It was very clearly recognisable. Their brand name itself obviously doesn't relate to the service, so it was very instantly memorable once they connected that existing word with their service. Then in 2016, just a couple of years ago, they went through a major rebranding exercise, came up with a completely new identity and logic, and it was all very symbolic and based on the idea of connections. And it was met with quite a lot of criticism. Myself included. I wrote about it on my blog at the time, saying that they had made a mistake in rebranding, not because they had taken a rebrand, but because they had failed to recognise the most important thing is that people use this service when they're in a hurry and therefore need a very quickly, easily identifiable app icon or brand mark. And it seems that even though it lasted a couple of years, that was the issue. It turns out that that the taxi drivers, the Uber drivers themselves, who were given branding materials and marketing materials such as car door stickers and window stickers, were actually turning them the opposite way around so that the word Uber was visible, because they felt that people wouldn't recognise that they were a registered Uber driver if they used the visuals the way they had been intended to be used. And that's pretty telling, in my opinion. And so whether it was intel of that or general consensus that they needed to change, they've now moved towards something more legible and closer to their original in black and white. My feelings on this are a bit underwhelmed. I think, yes, fine, it's much more recognisable now, and that's great. I also think it's reasonably generic. I probably would have borrowed from their 2016 identity some of the colours and forms, and maybe returned back to a more squared edge U, so that it felt like a really strong return to their brand with the added success of now being 8 years old, rather than just going back to something fairly basic to make it legible. So that's my opinion. Look forward to hearing yours. So the other rebrands that have been going on, there's Debenhams. So this one I actually didn't read anything about. I just happened upon their brand on social media, I think, and thought, oh gosh, that's completely new. So Debenhams have always had a very traditional, established, sort of safe brand. They've always mostly used a black background with white text, which is what all their signage used to be, their point of sale, their actual storefronts. I noticed a shift in them a few years ago that they started to lighten up their brand and have a white background with the logo inverted in black, but it was still the same logo with the classic serifs on fairly elegant serif in all caps font. And yeah, I mean, Debenhams as a brand, I have to be honest, don't excite me. I think they're a little bit safe in everything they do. That said, I like this new brand. I think it's really nice. I'm obviously going to include all the visuals below for you so you can have a look and let me know your thoughts. But they've basically gone with a serif font, black on white, but it's a little more bubbly. It has, and I mean that in the actual form, that the letters themselves are a little thicker and chunkier. It just has more personality, and I like that they've gone for something with more personality. It's also, even though it's a serif font and a chunky serif font, which can often be quite old-fashioned looking, it's actually quite modern looking. Reminds me of a few brands out there who've tried things like this. I especially like that the D on the font doesn't complete. The form has a little gap, and I've noticed that as a brand mark, they're using that on social media, and it seems a little more current, which is nice. So good on Debenhams. And finally, MailChimp have rebranded. So MailChimp have been around for, I'm not sure how long, but I'd say at least 10 years as an email provider used by a lot of freelancers and small businesses. And their name and their logo have always been very reminiscent of the era of jokey, catchy, quirky business names that were taking place at the time. They have adjusted their logo in small ways and played around with the visuals of their brand quite a lot in the time that they have been around. They have obviously always had the handwritten logo, a handwritten style logo, quite reminiscent of Instagram's typography, and the little icon of the monkey with a hat on, which is, you know, quite playful but possibly a bit dated. And it doesn't really surprise me that they've made a rebrand, because I've noticed them testing out and playing with different visuals. I've mentioned to a couple of friends in the industry as well that MailChimp doesn't seem to really know who they are as a brand, because they are trying so many different things in terms of visual styles of images and the copy and bringing in new types of graphics. It's all been a little bit all over the place, so I'm glad they've tied it together. However, I'm not glad that, well, not glad isn't quite the right phrase, but I think that they've made the wrong move. I think their rebranding at the moment is intended to present them more like a creative agency rather than a software, and I understand that, but it's not particularly user-friendly. The day that it happened, I don't remember any communications with them in advance warming me up to a rebrand. So as a user, I just went to go and find or send off an email campaign, obviously in a hurry, because, you know, if you're using tools like this, you're generally going about work and being pragmatic. And I had a real, WTF moment when I got to their website. I was like, am I in the right place? And for me, that's the ultimate failing of a rebrand. Obviously, there's always a bit of adjustment time, completely get that. But the fact they didn't have any sort of pop-up saying you're in the right place, we've just changed our look, they hadn't really warmed up to it in their comms, I think, was pretty poor. And the change was pretty drastic. So I was greeted with a really, really lurid bright yellow page with very large serif text all over it and lots of hand-drawn illustrations. All of those things would be completely fine for a different brand. They're very confusing. It doesn't look clean, easy and technological, which is what I expect from this brand because of their service. And the worst thing is that, they moved from the handwritten style logo into a logo that has a font type, but then they carried on the hand-drawn analogy or style with their illustrations, and I find that really confusing from them as a brand, because the new style of graphics would better suit their old logo, but their new logo is quite hard looking actually. It's almost a bit cartoony. As I said before a couple of times, I will put details beneath here, so I'd love to hear your thoughts. But for me, the move I'd have gone is, obviously you don't want to change the name, you've built up a huge reputation with the name, so even though it's a little bit kitsch and a bit of that era with having male in it, with having chimp in it, I would probably have sophisticated up or minimalised down how the monkey looked, maybe a bit like Deliveroo did in their first innings. They had a cartoon, almost clip art style kangaroo, and then they simplified down to something much more minimalist and abstract, and I would have done that for MailChimp. I also just don't really love the new fonts and the new brand font hierarchy they have. It's very oversized serif writing. It just seems much more suited to a different style of business, in my opinion. So that's my take on the 5 recent rebrands. Always exciting to see brands doing new things, taking the time to revitalise or keep fresh their brand. I don't think all of these necessarily did it that well, but some of them I think have really done well, and I look forward to seeing how these new brands bed in. It always takes a few weeks for people to adjust to things, myself included, so I'll be keen to see how these roll out and how the brands apply these new changes in the next weeks.